Kim. I am the one woman behind Sunday West, which is a small handmade to order clothing line. I design and make all the clothes, but in my free time, I love to upcycle men's dress shirts into cute women's clothes for myself and my friends. Today, I'm going to show you how to do one yourself. The first one we're going to do is this sleeveless version. You can make it into a tunic length or into a shorter top, whatever hem you choose. I am not tech savvy at all, so please bear with me. This is probably the lowest budget tutorial you'll run across on YouTube, but thanks for watching. The first things, just get your supplies ready. You need a pack of single fold bias tape, and this is it's a 1/2 inch wide, but it has folds on back sides. If you never knew what this was for, I will show you today. A pack of that. You're gonna need your sewing machine. This is gonna be, I'm gonna do my best to make this as basic sewer appropriate as possible. So if you can sew a straight stitch, you can do this, okay? Then you're gonna need a sleeveless shirt or a pattern for a sleeveless shirt that you really love. Try to pick one that's tried and true, that you've made before and that you're happy with. And then the last thing is the most important, which is a giant men's shirt. You want to go as big as possible. The bigger the better. I shop for mine at Goodwill, but I also have a friend who is 6'8" tall, and he gives me his hand-me-downs, so I'm pretty lucky. You want to start by making sure you've got your shirt laid out nice and flat. You want it resting at the shoulder seam that looks most natural, which is about 1 inch down from the actual shoulder seam. You want all the buttons buttoned nice and flat. If it has pleats in the back of the shirt, try to bring them towards the center, and we can get started. Now I have a kids washable marker right here, which I really like to use. You can use a water-soluble disappearing ink marker from the sewing supply store, but I find that they're expensive and they dry out quickly. So although I really like them, I always have these on hand. So then what you're gonna do is you're gonna lay out your shirt pattern or your shirt. So I'll show you both ways. There's not much of a difference, except for if you're working from a shirt, you ideally want it to be a woven shirt with no stretch without a bust dart. I don't actually have one of those. I just have this knit tank top. So since it's already sewn up, I need to know that I'm adding seam allowances, and I need to add a little bit of extra space to accommodate for the fact that this woven shirt does not have stretch. So starting with the front of the shirt, you're going to lay this down. And again, this is knit, so I'm adding seam allowances and a little extra space. And it's already finished. So you want the shoulder seams to come right up to around the collar, okay? And this is just gonna kind of be guesstimating. And the great thing about this is if you buy a shirt for $3.99 at the Goodwill, like I did yesterday, you don't have that much to lose if you mess up, which is part of why I like playing this way. I've got this laid out, and what I would do now is go ahead and mark. I would normally add a 1/2 inch for the seam allowances, but I think since we are working with the woven, I'll go ahead and add 1 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my ruler here. I'm going to make it as long as possible, so I'm going to extend the length all the way to the bottom of the shirt, and I'm going to try to use the natural shirt tail hem. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this. We did add an extra inch on the side to accommodate for the non-stretch and the seam allowances. But around the arms, we don't need to do that because we're not taking much fabric off when we add our single fold bias tape. So I'm going to go ahead and just trace exactly along those armholes. I did extend it a little bit at the top because this top, this style tends to be really cut in very close on the shoulders, and I didn't want it quite as much. So I just extended that out just a tiny bit at the top. Now we're going to flip it over and do the same on the back side. On the back side of my shirt, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use the pattern. I forgot to mention this, but I'm using a personal pattern for my brand, but it's a racer back. So the front is not cut the same as the back, whereas often tank tops are more similar. If you're going to use a regular tank top that you have, after you trace the front, I would go ahead and cut it with your scissors. Just cut the lines that you made up to the shoulder, and then open it up so that you can go ahead and pay attention to the back side of the shirt. So, to line up my pattern, I'm going to do pretty much what I did with the front, with the regular tank top, but my pattern's only a half pattern, so I'm going to have to, number one, I'm going to have to pull it off the top a little bit, because the pattern has seam allowance that my shirt doesn't need at the top shoulder, since that shoulder part's already sewn and we're using that portion. I'm going to have to try and line it up in the center of the shirt, which is not impossible. Also, if you haven't figured this out yet, for something like this, I'm not quite a perfectionist. Again, I need to accommodate for the extra width because this is a woven, but since I'm using the pattern, I don't need to add extra seam allowance. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a 1/2 inch to what my pattern already has marked out. Remember my tank top had those armbands? Well, the pattern actually doesn't have the armbands already accommodated for because that's something you add on after. So when I traced my armholes from the pattern, I had to add that inch. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to cut this side of the pattern and I'm going to flip it so I can mirror it on the other side. Be careful not to cut through your fabric, through both sides. I'm just cutting through the back of the shirt right now. Now that I've gone in and cut out the back, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the front side too. I cut out the front and the back, and now what I've done was I took the front and I folded the left and the right sides together all the way through to the back. That way I can line it up and see where I got a little off, and I can see right here that after I lined up the collar points that the right side of the front is cut a little wider than the left side. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that excess off. And there we go. Remember, I said the bigger the shirt, the better. This is a man's 2X. So you think of a man that's a double extra large, pretty big guy. And what I'm making here is going to be like a medium tank top. So the reason I said the bigger the better is because when you start cutting, the way that men's sleeves are built, they're so long and droopy. There's so much extra fabric towards the underarm. So if I had a smaller shirt, when I went to cut this top portion of her tank top under her arm, it would have gone into that sleeve seam. It's not the end of the world, but the fabric does go a different direction, so you might have a bit of pucker. And honestly, I just like to avoid it because I don't think it looks very clean. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this inside out and we're going to sew the side seam under the arm all the way to the hem on both sides. So here and here. I'm going to go ahead and start at the hem and sew up to the underarm in case it's off, which it is on this side. Also, remember we put in a 1/2 inch for seam allowance, so that's the mark we're going to use, the 4/8 inch line to sew our straight stitch. So like I mentioned over there, the top under the arm doesn't quite line up. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess. I want to be sure that I don't cut it in narrower in the front because that's just going to allow for less bust coverage. So I'm going to trim it just up to that other seam. Again, I know I sold you this. I know I mentioned this, but I am not a perfectionist when it comes to something like this. This is a fun little project, and if it doesn't work out, the investment is not overwhelming. That's part of why I started doing these, is making a button-down shirt is a ton of work. You have to put in all those buttonholes, the button placket, sew down all those buttons, and then if it doesn't work, I can't imagine how frustrated I would be, how much time I would feel like I had wasted. This is just an awesome way to repurpose something that someone else has outgrown. A lot of these have like frayed necks, slightly frayed, but that doesn't bother me when it's something like this. I think it's like a cute worn look. And men drop their dress shirts pretty quickly. Alright, so there we have it. The next thing you're going to do is optional, and that's just to finish this inside seam that you made from the underarm all the way to the hem. If you don't have a serger, you could use a zigzag stitch on your machine right along the edge, or you don't have to use anything at all. I keep mentioning the armbands on this tank top. So the paper pattern I've been using is actually the paper pattern to this tank top, which is from my line. I know that after you cut the fabric, I add the armband at the end, and it's not accommodated for in the pattern. Now an armband, a sleeve band, a neck band, all pretty much the same thing. It's right here on the edge. It's usually on a knit garment, and it's a stretchier fabric, like a more stable fabric than the garment often. And it's a smaller cut, but it's stretched when it's sewn so that this fabric doesn't tend to gape and stretch out over time. So you can see it. All right, so now we're all finished with the construction. It's already looking pretty good. So this is when the single fold bias tape comes in. What we're gonna do is we are sewing this bias tape around the armholes, and that's just going to be a nice way to finish the armholes. I'm going to start under the arm, and we're sewing the right sides together. So I've got the bias tape. If you can see, it has folds on one side and it's nice and smooth on the other. I'm going to open up the right fold on the back side, and I'm going to sew it to the armhole starting under the arm. And we're going to go all the way around. Okay guys, back to the sewing machine. So when I told you we're going to sew the right sides together, we're opening that right fold and we're starting under the arm. And what I want you to do is stitch with inside that fold crease. So that's one nice thing about the store-bought bias tape, is that they have it treated hardcore so that crease is always there. Let's get started over here. I'm towards the end of this stitch, the end of this second armhole. So I'm going to show you how I finish it off. Again, this is not a perfectly finished garment, and if you know how to do it, go ahead and do it. But I'm just doing this for fun, and I want to make it a simple tutorial for everyone. So I'm not really going to make it super clean, but it'll be all right. So I'm sewing this up to here. So I get back to where I started. I'm going to try so hard to not say the word so. Every time I hear it come out of my mouth, I cringe a little bit because I've been saying it so much. And I just did it again. Okay. Off topic. We are going to go ahead and finish this stitch. I'm going to lay the bias tape over where I started, and I'm going to stitch straight over that for a few stitches and then just trim it off. So I'm going to back tack. I did it again! Ah. And then I'm trimming right here. This tape does not unravel because it was cut on the bias in the first place. The bias is just a 45-degree angle. So, and the reason that it's cut that way is so that it can stretch a little bit. All right, so we'll take this out of the machine. I did it again. Ah! And now what we're going to do is we're going to flip the whole bias towards the inside and stitch it down. So I'm going to flip the shirt inside out. My dog is going crazy. I don't know what it could be. All right, I'm on the wrong side, and I'm going to flip all this bias tape in. And that way it encases that raw edge. It's quite nice. We're going to stitch as close to the edge of the bias tape as possible without the risk of it running off. So I'm leaving about 1/8 of an inch. You can press this before you sew it down, but I'm trying to make this quick and dirty. Almost done. The last thing I'm gonna do is put my brand tag in there. I like to think of it as collaboration. All right, y'all. So here she is. Isn't she cute? This is for a friend of mine who is a big Clemson fan. And she should be good to go. Okay, I'm gonna try to do one of these again sometime. I'm gonna try to do this shirt, and I'm going to do my best to be better at talking to the camera because it's awkward. If you guys have any questions, if there were things that I didn't elaborate on enough, please message me, comment, email me. My website is sundaywest.com, and my email is kim@sundaywest.com. Thank you for bearing with me. It's been a pleasure. All right, bye.